Shabbat Shalom. Today we start with Vayikra, Leviticus. Let's begin with a blessing. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech ha'olam, asher kedeshanu b'mitzvotav, v'tzivanu la'asot b'devrei Torah. Vayikra, chapter 1. Adonai called to Moshe and spoke to him from the tent of meeting. He said, "Speak to the people of Israel. Say to them, when any of you brings an offering to Adonai, you may bring your animal offering either from the herd or from the flock. If his offering is a burnt offering from the herd, he must offer a male without defect. He is to bring it to the entrance of the tent of meeting so that it can be accepted by Adonai. He is to lay his hand upon the head of the burnt offering, and it will be accepted on his behalf to make atonement for him. He is to slaughter the young bull before Adonai, and the sons of Aaron, the Kohanim, are to present the blood. They are to splash the blood against all the sides of the altar, which is by the entrance to the tent of meeting. He is to skin the burnt offering and cut it in pieces. The descendants of Aaron, the Kohen, are to put fire on the altar and arrange wood on the fire. The sons of Aaron, he is to wash the entrails and lower parts of the legs with water, and the Kohen is to cause all of it to go up in smoke on the altar as a burnt offering. It is an offering made by fire, a fragrant aroma for Adonai. If his offering is from the flock, whether from the sheep or from the goats for a burnt offering, he must offer a male without defect. He is to slaughter it on the north side of the altar before Adonai, and the sons of Aaron, the Kohanim, are to splash the blood against the altar before Adonai, against all sides of the altar. He is to cut it into pieces, and the Kohen is to arrange them with the head and fat on the wood, which is on the fire on the altar. He is to wash the entrails and lower parts of the legs with water. And the Kohen is to offer it all and make it go up in smoke on the altar as a burnt offering. It is an offering made by fire, a fragrant aroma for Adonai. If his offering to Adonai is a burnt offering of birds, he must offer a dove or a young pigeon. The Kohen is to bring it to the altar, snap off its head, and make it go up in smoke on the altar. Its blood is to be drained out on the side of the altar. He is to remove the food pouch and its feathers from the neck and discard it on the pile of ashes just east of the altar. He is to pull it open with a wing on each side, but without tearing it in half. The Kohen is to make it go up in smoke on the altar, on the wood, which is on the fire, as a burnt offering. It is an offering made by fire, a fragrant aroma for Adonai. Chapter 2. Anyone who brings a grain offering to Adonai is to make his offering of fine flour. He is to pour olive oil on it and put frankincense on it. He is to bring it to the sons of Aaron, the Kohanim. The Kohen is to take a handful of the fine flour from it, together with its olive oil and all its frankincense, and make this reminder portion go up in smoke on the altar as an offering made by fire, a fragrant aroma for Adonai. But the rest of the grain offering will belong to Aaron and his sons. It is an especially holy part of the offering for Adonai made by fire. When you bring a grain offering which has been baked in the oven, it is to consist of either unleavened cakes made of fine flour mixed with olive oil, or matzah spread with olive oil. If your offering is a grain offering cooked on a griddle, it is to consist of unleavened fine flour mixed with olive oil. You are to break it in pieces and pour olive oil on it. It is a grain offering. If your offering is a grain offering cooked in a pot, it is to consist of fine flour with olive oil. You are to bring the grain offering prepared in any of these ways to Adonai. It is to be presented to the Kohen, and he is to bring it to the altar. The Kohen is to remove the reminder portion of the grain offering and make it go up in smoke on the altar as an offering made by fire, a fragrant aroma for Adonai. But the rest of the grain offering will belong to Aaron and his sons. It is an especially holy part of the offerings for Adonai made by fire. No grain offering that you bring to Adonai is to be made with leaven, because you are not to cause any leaven or honey to go up in smoke as an offering made by fire to Adonai. As an offering of first fruits, you may bring these to Adonai, but they are not to be brought up onto the altar to make a fragrant aroma. You are to season every grain offering of yours with salt. Do not omit from your grain offering the salt of the covenant with your God, but offer salt with all your offerings. If you bring a grain offering of first fruits to Adonai, you are to bring as the grain offering from your first fruits kernels of grain from fresh ears, dry roasted with fire. Put olive oil on it and lay frankincense on it. It is a grain offering. The Kohen is to cause the reminder portion of it, its grits and olive oil, with all its frankincense, to go up in smoke. It is an offering made by fire for Adonai. Chapter 3. If his offering is a sacrifice of peace offerings, then if he offers before Adonai an animal from the herd, then no matter whether it is male or female, it must be without defect. He is to lay his hand on the head of his offering and slaughter it at the entrance to the tent of meeting, and the sons of Aaron, the Kohanim, are to splash the blood against all sides of the altar. He is to present the sacrifice of the peace offerings as an offering made by fire to Adonai. It is to consist of the fat covering the inner organs, all the fat above the inner organs, the 2 kidneys, the fat on them near the flanks, and the covering of the liver, which he will remove with the kidneys. Aaron's sons will make it go up in smoke on the altar on top of the burnt offering, which is on the wood on the fire. It is an offering made by fire, a fragrant aroma for Adonai. If his offering for a sacrifice of peace offerings to Adonai is from the flock, then when he offers it, No matter whether it is male or female, it must be without defect. If he brings a lamb for his offering, then he is to present it before Adonai. He is to lay his hand on the head of his offering and slaughter it at the entrance to the tent of meeting. And the sons of Aaron are to splash its blood against all sides of the altar. From the sacrifices made as peace offerings, he is to present Adonai with an offering made by fire. It is to consist of its fat, the entire fat tail, which he will remove close to the lower backbone, the fat covering the inner organs, all the fat above the inner organs, the two kidneys, the fat on them near the flanks, and the covering of the liver, which he will remove with the kidneys. The Kohen will make it go up in smoke on the altar. It is food, an offering made by fire to Adonai. If his offering is a goat, then he is to present it before Adonai. He is to lay his hand on its head and slaughter it in front of the tent of meeting. And the sons of Aaron are to splash its blood against all sides of the altar. He is to present from it his offering, an offering made by fire to Adonai. It is to consist of the fat covering the inner organs, all the fat above the inner organs, the two kidneys, the fat on them near the flanks, and the covering of the liver, which he will remove with the kidneys. The Kohen will make them go up in smoke on the altar. It is food, an offering made by fire, to be a fragrant aroma. All the fat belongs to Adonai. It is to be a permanent regulation through all your generations, wherever you live, that you will eat neither fat nor blood. Chapter 4. Adonai said to Moshe, "Tell the people of Israel, if anyone sins inadvertently against any of the mitzvot of Adonai concerning things which should not be done, if he does any one of them, then it is the anointed Kohen who sinned and thus brought guilt on the people. He is to offer Adonai a young bull without defect as a sin offering for the sin he committed. He must bring the bull to the entrance of the tent of meeting before Adonai, lay his hand on the bull's head, and slaughter the bull in the presence of Adonai. The anointed Kohen is to take some of the bull's blood and bring it to the tent of meeting. The Kohen is to dip his finger in the blood and sprinkle some of the blood 7 times in the presence of Adonai, in front of the curtain of the sanctuary. The Kohen is to put some of the blood on the horns of the altar for fragrant incense before Adonai, there in the tent of meeting. All the remaining blood of the bull he is to pour out at the base of the altar. At the base of the altar for burnt offerings, which is at the entrance to the tent of meeting. He is to remove from the bull for the sin offering all of its fat, the fat covering the inner organs, all the fat above the inner organs, the two kidneys, the fat on them near the flanks, and the covering of the liver, which he will remove with the kidneys. As it is removed from an ox sacrificed as a peace offering. And the Kohen is to make these parts go up in smoke on the altar for burnt offerings. But the bull's hide and all its flesh, with its head, the lower parts of its legs, its inner organs, and dung. In other words, the entire bull, he is to bring outside the camp to a clean place where the ashes are emptied out. There he is to burn it on wood with fire, there, where the ashes are emptied out. It is to be burned up. If the entire community of Israel inadvertently makes a mistake, with the assembly being unaware of the matter, and they do something against any of the mitzvot of Adonai concerning things which should not be done, they are guilty. When the sin they have committed becomes known, then the assembly is to offer a young bull as a sin offering and bring it before the tent of meeting. The leaders of the community are to lay their hands on the bull's head and slaughter the bull in the presence of Adonai. The anointed Kohen is to bring some of the bull's blood to the tent of meeting. The Kohen is to dip his finger in the blood and sprinkle it 7 times in the presence of Adonai in front of the curtain. He is to put some of the blood on the horns of the altar before Adonai, there in the tent of meeting. All the remaining blood he is to pour out at the base of the altar for burnt offerings, which is at the entrance to the tent of meeting. He is to remove all its fat and make it go up in smoke on the altar. This is what he is to do with the bull. He must do the same with this bull as he does with the one for the sin offering. Thus, the Kohen will make atonement for them, and they will be forgiven. He is to bring the bull outside the camp and burn it as he burned the first bull. It is the sin offering for the assembly. When a leader sins and inadvertently does something against any of the mitzvot of Adonai concerning things which should not be done, he is guilty. If the sin which he committed becomes known to him, he is to bring as his offering a male goat without defect, lay his hand on the goat's head, and slaughter it in the place where they slaughter the burnt offering in the presence of Adonai. It is a sin offering. The Kohen is to take some of the blood of the sin offering with his finger and put it on the horns of the altar for burnt offerings. Its remaining blood he is to pour out at the base of the altar for burnt offerings. All its fat he is to make go up in smoke on the altar, like the fat of the sacrifice for peace offerings. Thus, the Kohen will make atonement for him in regard to his sin, and he will be forgiven. If an individual among the people commits a sin inadvertently, doing something against any of the mitzvot of Adonai concerning things which should not be done, he is guilty. If the sin he committed becomes known to him, he is to bring as his offering a female goat without defect for the sin he committed. Lay his hand on the head of the sin offering and slaughter the sin offering in the place of burnt offerings. The Kohen is to take some of its blood with his finger and put it on the horns of the altar for burnt offerings. All its remaining blood he is to pour out at the base of the altar. All its fat he is to remove, as the fat is removed from the sacrifice for peace offerings. And the Kohen is to make it go up in smoke on the altar as a fragrant aroma for Adonai. Thus, the Kohen will make atonement for him, and he will be forgiven. If he brings a lamb as his sin offering, he's to bring a female without defect. Lay his hand on the head of the sin offering and slaughter it as a sin offering in the place where they slaughter burnt offerings. The Kohen is to take some of the blood of the sin offering and with his finger and put it on the horns of the altar for burnt offerings. All its remaining blood he is to pour out at the base of the altar. All its fat is to be removed, as the fat of a lamb is removed from the sacrifice for peace offerings. And the Kohen is to make it go up in smoke on the altar, on top of the offerings for Adonai made by fire. Thus, the Kohen will make atonement for him in regard to the sin he committed, and he will be forgiven. Chapter 5. If a person who is a witness, sworn to testify, sins by refusing to tell what he has seen or heard about the matter, he must bear the consequences. If a person touches something unclean, whether the carcass of an unclean wild animal, a domestic animal, or a reptile, he is guilty, even though he may not be aware that he is unclean. If he touches some human uncleanness, no matter what the source of his uncleanness is, and he is unaware of it, then when he learns of it, he is guilty. If someone allows to slip from his mouth an oath to do evil or to do good, and he doesn't remember that he clearly spoke this oath, then, no matter what it was about, when he learns of it, he is guilty. A person guilty of any of these things is to confess in what manner he sinned, and bring his guilt offering to Adonai for the sin he committed. It is to be a female from the flock, either a lamb or a goat, as a sin offering. And the Kohen will make atonement for him in regard to his sin. If he can't afford a lamb, he is to bring as his guilt offering for the sin he committed 2 doves or 2 young pigeons for Adonai, the one as a sin offering and the other as a burnt offering. He is to bring them to the Kohen, who will offer the one for a sin offering first. He is to wring its neck, but not remove the head. Sprinkle some of the blood of the sin offering on the side of the altar, and drain out the rest of the blood at the base of the altar. It is a sin offering. He is to prepare the second as a burnt offering in the manner prescribed. Thus, the Kohen will make atonement for him in regard to the sin which he committed, and he will be forgiven. But if his means are insufficient, even for 2 doves or 2 young pigeons, then he is to bring as his offering for the sin he committed 2 quarts of fine flour for a sin offering. He is not to put any olive oil or frankincense on it, because it is a sin offering. He is to bring it to the Kohen, and the Kohen is to take a handful of it as its reminder portion and make it go up in smoke on the altar on top of the offerings for Adonai made by fire. It is a sin offering. Thus, the Kohen will make atonement for him in regard to the sin he committed concerning all these things, and he will be forgiven. The rest will belong to the Kohanim, as with a grain offering. Adonai said to Moshe, if anyone acts improperly and inadvertently sins in regard to the holy things of Adonai, he is to bring as his guilt offering for Adonai a ram without defect from the flock, or its equivalent in silver shekels, using the sanctuary shekel as the standard. According to your appraisal of its value, it is a guilt offering. In addition, he is to make restitution for whatever he did wrong in regard to the holy thing. Moreover, he is to add to that 1/5 and give it to the Kohen. Then the Kohen will make atonement with the ram of the guilt offering, and he will be forgiven. If someone sins by doing something against any of the mitzvot of Adonai concerning things which should not be done, he is guilty, even if he is unaware of it, and he bears the consequences of his wrongdoing. He must bring a ram without defect from the flock, or its equivalent, according to your appraisal, to the Kohen for a guilt offering. The Kohen will make atonement concerning the error which he committed, even though he was unaware of it, and he will be forgiven. It is a guilt offering. He is certainly guilty before Adonai. Adonai said to Moshe, if someone sins and acts perversely against Adonai, by dealing falsely with his neighbor in regard to a deposit or security entrusted to him, by stealing from him, by extorting him, or by dealing falsely in regard to a lost object he has found, or by swearing to a lie. If a person commits any of these sins, then, if he sinned and is guilty, he is to restore whatever it was he stole or obtained by extortion, or whatever was deposited with him, or the lost object which he found, or anything about which he has sworn falsely. He is to restore it in full, plus an additional 1/5. He must return it to the person who owns it on the day when he presents his guilt offering. He is to bring as his guilt offering to Adonai a ram without defect from the flock, or its equivalent, according to your appraisal, to the Kohen. It is a guilt offering. Thus, the Kohen will make atonement for him before Adonai, and he will be forgiven in regard to whatever it was he did that made him guilty. Wow. So, we've learned how to become forgiven for these all these sins, all these various sins. Vayikra, the very first word in the Leviticus, Vayikra, means and he called. Very first word, and he called. That was the same way it was with Exodus as well. There is a continuation with the Torah. We think in terms of the 5 books of the Torah, but in another sense, the Torah is all one. It is all one. It continues. And this is continued because the book of Vayikra begins with a conjunction. Who starts a book with the word and? And he called. God does, because it's a continuation. This is a continuation of Exodus. Goes right, and if you look at the Exodus like we did last week, it goes right into Leviticus. Now, that is by divine intention. It's done intentionally, right? As opposed to many of these sins that we study about that were unintentional sins, right? This and that is intentional. Vayikra, and he called. And in the text, in the Hebrew scroll of the text, you'll not see this in your English translation, of course, because that's in Hebrew. But Vayikra ends with a small olive. Not the full-size olive, a small olive. That is the first letter of the Hebrew alphabet and is the last letter of the word Vayikra, which is the first word in the book of Vayikra, Leviticus, because in Hebrew they named the book after the main thought of within the first sentence. And in this case, it's the very first word, Vayikra. Right. Now, what about this small olive? Why is it there? What does it signify? Well, the sages tell us that one of the things that is there, reason it's there, is because it is Moses that God is calling to, and he calls. And that Moses wrote the small olive to signify his humility before God. A small olive. Okay. But there are different layers of meaning in Scripture, certainly. And there is also the recognition that, as we saw in Deuteronomy chapter 25, which I said we saw, but anyway, it's Deuteronomy chapter 25, verses 17 through 18. Remember what Amalek did to you on the road as you were coming out of Egypt. How he met you by the road, attacked those in the rear, those who were exhausted and straggling behind when you were tired and weary. He did not fear God. Therefore, when Adonai your God has given you rest from all your surrounding enemies in the land Adonai your God is giving you as your inheritance to possess, you are to blot out all memory of Amalek from under heaven. Don't forget. Also in Exodus chapter 17, verses 14 through 16. Adonai said to Moshe, write this in a book to be remembered and tell it to Yehoshua. I will completely blot out any memory of Amalek from under heaven. Moshe built an altar, called it Adonai Nisi, which means Adonai is my miracle. Yod He Vahe is my miracle. But he doesn't say Yod He Vahe here. It's not Yod He Vahe. He says Yah is my miracle. Right? Okay. So, and he says, because their hand, I misspoke. It is Yod He Vahe, Adonai Nisa. It's the next verse. And said, because their hand was against the throne of Yah, Adonai will fight Amalek generation after generation. I suppose I just sinned inadvertently. Yeah, okay. That's how you do it, folks. That's how you sin inadvertently. You misspeak. You say, sin. But that throne of Adonai in the Hebrew, in that verse, does not include the Aleph. So it's here, Exodus 17, verse 8. It should be Kasa. Throne. It's Al-Kes. The Aleph is missing in the text. And then we have Yah. What happened? Now, we've got a small Aleph here, and then we see this connection here, and the Aleph's missing completely. What is going on here? What is going on? Part of this aspect, and Amalek comes in under a lot of heavy judgment here, certainly. But what is it about Amalek? What is it? And why is God's divine name shortened here in connection with the throne? And the throne itself is missing the Aleph. I know, you don't hear it because the Aleph is a silent letter, right? But in the text, you can see it. When they do the English translation, they don't erase the E. Mick still says it's still throne. Right? That sounds like throne. It's because of what Amalek has done. He attacked the stragglers, the weak, the children, the young ones, those who could not keep up, those that were at the end. He attacked the small ones, the little ones. Also, he attacked them by ambush. They were surprised. Amalek represents the forces of chaos in our world. And they want to say that the world is chaos. They don't give honor to God. They don't give glory to God. They seek to diminish God. Just as his throne is diminished, they seek to diminish his throne. That is the attack. The context of that verse is the attack on the throne of God. And even his divine name, Yah, is diminished. Do you know of an instance where that happens? In Revelation chapter 12, verse 5. She gave birth to a son, a male child, the one who will rule all the nations with a staff of iron. But her child was snatched up to God and his throne. And she fled into the desert, where she has a place prepared by God so that she can be taken care of for 1,260 days. Verse 7. Next. There was a battle in heaven. The throne of God. Battle in heaven. Michael and his angels fought against the dragon, and the dragon and his angels fought back, but it was not strong enough to win, so that there was no longer any place for them in heaven. The great dragon was thrown out, that ancient serpent, also known as the devil, and Hasatan, the adversary, the deceiver of the whole world. He was hurled down to the earth, and his angels were hurled down for him. So, can you think of anything in our world that often leads to chaos, that says that the world is based upon chaos? Just like Haman tossed the lot. He did that on purpose. It wasn't just that he wanted to wipe out the Jews. It was an attack against God. Here is the day we will wipe out the Jews. Chance. Random chance. Cast a lot, and that's the day. But God says, you have chosen the day of my deliverance of my people. And God brings order out of chaos. And so the fight is on, and it continues to this day. We are still fighting the forces of Amalek. We are still at war with the forces of Amalek. And we are fighting against chaos because there are those who believe this world was made by random chance. Right? But we know better. Okay, so, all right. That was the main point I wanted to make today. But that's not one that's in Tony's thematic analysis handbook. So let's go on and look at the next one. Corbin is in there. All right? And this is the Hebrew word for Corbin, offering, which is translated offering or sacrifice. And it means to draw near. The whole purpose of these sacrifices, these offerings, is to draw near to God. It's how we, sinful people, or to draw near to God. That was the whole purpose of that. The whole purpose was to establish relationship with God, to draw near. And that was the whole purpose behind sacrifice, and that is actually the meaning of offering and sacrifice. This is the way in which the Israelites, through Moshe, through the commandments, through the Torah, within the Torah, were tasked to draw near. Now, there are a number of types of offerings. We saw different ones. Sometimes it had to be a male without defect. Sometimes it could be had to be a female without defect. Sometimes it was a bull. Sometimes a ram. And sometimes, based upon a person's ability to afford the sacrifice, it was ratcheted right down to the poorest of the poor, so that they could still draw near to God. The whole purpose, to draw near to God. And the whole idea of there in the tabernacle and later on in the temple was to come into the presence of God. And to obtain forgiveness. To obtain forgiveness. So we have these offerings, and of Corbin. The first one is Olah, which we call the burnt offering. Olah, though, actually means elevation. Elevation. So it's lifted up. It's something that's lifted up. It's an ascending elevation. And you heard through the reading how the offering was a fragrant aroma by fire going up to God. And how many of these offerings actually had a little bit of frankincense? All frankincense was burned up with the reminder portion. And so we think, oh, how all this burning, how can that be a fragrant aroma? I'll tell you what, you put some frankincense in there, and it's like incense going up. It was a fragrant aroma around the altar. Smelled good. Smelled good. And I don't just mean steak grill on the grill either, right? That kind of smell. I'm not talking about just that. Yes, sir.
I just thought it was cool. Interesting point. I thought it was cool that the point of view of these commandments in the first 5 chapters here were directly to Aaron and how he should treat the sacrifices to people, because it says, I'm just going to pick
Yeah,
one.
that's right.
This is what Leviticus 1.
Mm-hmm.
Speak to the sons of Israel, say to them, when any man of you brings an offering to the Lord, you have to bring an offering of an animal from him. If his offering, he shall offer it. He wasn't telling that to Aaron and his sons. So the commandments was for the people, but this is how the priests are to handle it. And then when those same, the Olah offering, the Shalamim, and the other offerings that are described in the first 5, when they get repeated again, later on in a couple portions from now, it'll be from the people's point of view and how we are to approach. So that was cool, like how the Levitical priest should approach people and how to keep that sacrifice holy. And then it's also later on, because we know that no word in the Torah is redundant, that the sacrifices are going to be how we should approach and how to keep it holy. Interesting point. I just wanted.
It's a great point. And in fact, the offerings that are listed, of course, this one, the Olah is the fire offering, right? The elevation offering. But there is the meal offering, there's the peace offering, there's a sin offering, and there's a guilt offering. Now, those first 3 that are talked about in this section are voluntary. They're all voluntary. So, the Olah is voluntary. The Mincha is voluntary. The Shalamim is voluntary. Fire, meal, peace. The last 2, the Shatat and the Asham, are mandatory. The sin and the guilt offering are mandatory. So, the first 3 do not result in a forgiveness of sin. Although the first one does talk about atonement, but there's no mention of sin. Interesting. Well, it makes you wonder what's being atoned for there. And it's voluntary. But Asham and Shatat, those are mandatory. There is forgiveness of sin when those are. And don't miss out in this section on the culmination of this, which we didn't get to. You'll see a summary section, and then after that, the Messiah, Yeshua, addressed by Tony Robinson in the voluntary offerings. You don't want to miss that either. All right. We're out of time. Shabbat Shalom.